Welcome, new and old friends. My name is 242. This spooky, scary Sunday, I have two tales for you. Our first is about an odd man seemingly following a woman from her work to her home. The last one is about an old school friend coming over and how horrible he turned out. Make sure you're safe before you sit back and listen to these tales. He's going to come back for me. So, this happened when I was about 18, just moved out of my mom's house in the summer to live near my boyfriend while he attended college and I worked full time. Blah blah. For context, I'm a woman and I live with 3 other girls in a shifty apartment building. It happened to be around Thanksgiving, and because I work a minimum wage job I was new at, I wasn't going to request a week off to go home. Which was fine, money anyway. After a few days of being in the apartment complex alone, I noticed it was just me and the old man in the apartment above me. Neither of us had a car, so the entire lot was empty. I worked from about 3 p.m. to 11 p.m., closing at a coffee shop. One of these boring days, I walked the block to the bus stop because I didn't have a car at the time. The buses were running an odd hour as it was a college campus, and all the students have gone for break. Now, I've always been aware of things around me, people, noises, placement of things. I've been through some horrible things, but this one still scares me even though I now live states away. I was waiting at the bus stop just before dark when a man, probably about 24 years old, 5'5". I noticed his body type was pretty muscular. Not that I was checking him out, just observing. He smiled at me, which made me feel better. Of course it did. I never even seen where he came from. He was just there behind me suddenly and struck up a conversation. I remember he had really dark eyes that seemed to never look away. I remember even thinking to myself that he wasn't blinking. Just pure deranged crazy in his eyes, which was so mismatched from the smile he plastered on his face. He spoke to me a bit and asked how I was, what I was up to, the typical pre-COVID stranger chatter. He said he was from Africa and studying for his master's. He seemed very versed in what he said he was studying, so I never assumed he was lying. Eventually the bus comes and we both get on sitting around the same part of the front. I ride for about 5 minutes before getting off and walking the rest of the way to work, about 3 blocks. I go in, clock in, and start my shift. I glance up outside, and there he is. The guy from the bus. I thought it was weird, of course. I pointed out to my coworker. Everyone agreed it was weird as well. He just idles by the door. One of the 10 people I've seen in the whole town since break started, and it had to be this guy. He stayed for about an hour and eventually fades away without me noticing. I go on with my shift, not thinking too deeply into it. The idea that I carried a knife was enough to comfort me. After my shift, I get back on the bus towards home, walk through the empty parking lot and into my quiet apartment building. I was on the 2nd level of 3 floors. I skipped steps with my keys out already, and when I reached the top of the steps, guess who is there? This is when I knew I should be concerned. I didn't think anyone else lived in this building, and I never mentioned I did, and I certainly did not mention my apartment number. He looks up, seeing me, gives me another one of those friendly smiles, and says my name cheerfully. Another thing I never told him. I acknowledged as I moved around him to enter my apartment. He moved back and stayed to move down the stairs, so I opened the door and he immediately ran back up and put his arm on the door. Somehow, he did this so friendly? I almost thought he did have a good intention. He mentioned that he can see my Xbox in the living room from the door and rushed in to play. He eagerly asked me to play and start sitting down, taking off his shoes. I mentioned my roommates are sleeping and I couldn't hang out as I had to work early and my boyfriend was coming over soon. All lies, of course. He couldn't take the hint, so I asked him to hang out another time, which of course I wouldn't do. He mentions he lives across the hall diagonally from me, which was strange because I was acquaintance with a few people who lived there and I wasn't familiar with him living there. I became scared. I told him I'd be back and went to the bathroom as I left my front door open. I immediately called my boyfriend. Now, I'm not sure at all why I didn't call the cops. I suppose I didn't want to make a scene. He tells me he's sending a friend to come get me who still happens to be in town. I was freaked and decided, okay, I'll just go out and play nice. When I exit the bathroom, he's putting his shoes on and he was leaving. I was confused, but happy. He tries to hug me and I decline, saying I was a bit sick. He nods and leaves my apartment. He walks about 10 feet from my apartment diagonally from me and goes in, smiling, wishing me a good night. I shut the door and made sure it was locked. I proceeded to check the other doors and windows in my apartment. All the windows were good and I got to the back door. I always try to feel as secure as I can in my house, taking extra security steps being a young female. I checked the lock on the back door. It's unlocked. My heart dropped into my stomach. I immediately burst into tears. I knew for a fact I had locked this door and placed a long wooden stick to keep it from sliding open. I checked it twice before I left for work. The stick was gone. I never did actually find it. We reported it to the police as it was clear his intentions were not good. He checked the apartment and no one answered, so they left the patrol car nearby. The next day, they contacted the building owner and were able to enter the apartment. Big surprise, he didn't live there. He had been squatting there since the 4 people who lived there left for Thanksgiving. Nothing else was done, which makes sense. Nobody else knew this guy, where he lived, went to school, anything. I now, of course, understand the situation in the entirety along with what I should have done versus what I did do. This story of my own always gave me a weird feeling in my stomach, just like some of the stories I've seen on here. Be safe out there, guys. My sister saved me from a guy who was later arrested for sexual assault. I am a 23 female now, but this happened when I was 20 and lived by myself for the first time in a ground floor apartment. I live in a small rural town and was usually very comfortable living alone. However, my town is severely affected by the drug epidemic and I've had a surprising amount of bad experiences for such a low population. To give some necessary background info, my younger sister, 18 at the time, had started dating. They'd only hung out a few times. This guy. It's important to note he is deaf, and my older sister, younger sister, and I don't know much about him except that he seems very nice. Being the cool older sister I was, and frequently let my younger sister use my apartment and apartments in the past as a place to hang out with her friends. She asked if this guy and her could come over and hang out. I said yes. It was fine, except I noticed they used my sister's phone to text and talk back and forth, because she couldn't sign and it was easier than him having to read her lips. I noticed he didn't have a phone, so I offered to let him have an old one of mine. I think this was my first mistake. He was overjoyed, and at the time, I just felt like I had done something really nice. But now, I feel like that was a signal to him that I'm generous and naive. So, fast forward a couple weeks later, it's pouring rain outside, and I hear a knock on my door. I try to look to see who it was through the peephole, but it was dark in the corridor and I could only make out 2 figures. I opened the door without asking who it was or anything. Second mistake. I opened it and see the deaf man and his friend, who's this guy I recognized and went to school with. I remember we went to middle school together, but he vanished after high school, most likely dropped out. I knew he was a little bit of a troublemaker at that age, but also remembered him as someone who was funny, nice to me, and I didn't think he had any ill intentions. I asked what was up, and he said that it was pouring rain and they were waiting for a friend to pick them up. Deaf guy had told him he knew someone that lived close by and would let them wait out the rain. I hesitated for maybe 10 seconds and the guy from school just shoved his way past me and into my apartment. That was when I started to feel like I fudged up, but tried to stay positive. Guy from school started walking around my apartment, checking out stuff on my shelf. I tried to make small talk, and then he said he needed to use my bathroom. You have to go through my bedroom to get to it, so I pointed it out to him. My kitchen shares a wall with my bathroom, so you can hear stuff pretty easily. I could hear him rummaging through my cabinets. Deaf guy is just sitting on my couch looking at his phone, the one I gave him. Guy from school comes back out and stands with me in the kitchen, asks if I have any extra clothes for them, since they're all wet. I told him I have nothing that would fit them and wasn't for women. Then things started to get weird. Every time the deaf guy would look away or get lost in his phone for a minute, the guy from school would get closer to me until he was standing on top of me. He would say something to me that would be really inappropriate as soon as the deaf guy wasn't turned towards us and therefore couldn't read our lips. At first, it was just really bad flirting. Like, you're just as hot as you were in school. It wasn't until he said something along the lines of, I could take you into your bedroom and he'd never hear us, that I started to plan an escape. I pushed around him to get closer to the deaf guy because clearly he was the only thing holding the other guy back. I sat next to him on the couch and quickly texted my older sister who only lived a short drive away. I told her there were 2 men in my apartment and needed help. She was there within 5 minutes. After she walks in, she acts like we had made plans to go shopping and told them they needed to leave. Guy from school starts to laugh and said he planned on spending the night. My sister is super confident and a take-no-bull kind of woman, so she was like, you can either leave peacefully or we can call the cops and have you removed. Deaf guy realized they weren't welcomed, acted very apologetic, and quickly gathered his stuff to leave. Guy from school acted pissy, but left. We walked out behind them, locked my door, and got into her car. Older sister said, let's just wait for a second. We watched as they walked to the end of the street, but the guy from school started arguing with the deaf guy and pulling on his sleeve and seeming to be wanting to turn back around. We left and got food to kill some time, and on our way back we circled the block and neighborhood block to see if they were still lingering. She walked in with me and watched her out the door as she left. Younger sister ghosted the deaf guy. Even though he seemed like he wasn't aware of how bad his friend was, she didn't want anything to do with him afterwards. I had my stepdad install a motion sensor light by my door so I could see who was standing outside of it. A year later, the guy from school was arrested for sexual assault, among with other run-ins with the law over drugs. I got chills reading the article, thinking that it could have been me, and even the woman in the article could have had it worse happen to her from what I read. I have a lot of things to thank my older sister for, but that one I'll never forget.
I thought I would cut in here before 242
gives you her outro to tell you my plans, darlings. I'm going to be posting some extra special videos at the end of this month, so you better be ready for that. I hope you enjoyed this special. It's a topic picked by my Patreon Chloe, and if you like to pick a topic I read, then check out my Patreon. Tell me what you think in the comments below. Will you be checking your doors more and even more careful who you let into your home? If you enjoyed this video, then hit that like button and make sure it feels it. If you want to hear 42's extra special videos, you better make sure you're subscribed and turn that bell to all notifications. Come back this Thursday for my day stories. Now, I better go track 42 down and make sure she isn't getting into anything too bad. Night, my friends.